The story of Baby P, also known as Peter Connolly, shocked and appalled the United Kingdom, drawing widespread media attention and sparking significant changes in child protection policies. Born on March 1st, 2006, Peter's short life was marred by severe abuse, leading to his death on the 3rd of August 2007 at just 17 months old. This case exposed serious failures within the social services system, tasked with safeguarding vulnerable children like Peter. Peter Connolly was born to Tracy Connolly in North London. His biological father was denied access by Tracy, and Peter's life quickly became entangled in a cycle of neglect and abuse. Tracy Connolly's boyfriend, Stephen Barker, and his brother Jason Owen were later implicated in his abuse. Despite being on the at-risk register and receiving 60 visits from social workers, health professionals and police over the final 8 months of his life, the systematic abuse Peter endured was not fully recognised or stopped. He was seen by health and social services professionals multiple times, yet the severity of his situation was always underestimated. Peter's death resulted from more than 50 injuries across his body, inflicted over months of torture. The autopsy revealed multiple bruises, abrasions and cuts, including a broken back and ribs, which ultimately led to his death. The circumstances leading to Peter's death caused a public outcry and intense scrutiny of the child protection services in Haringey, the London borough responsible for Peter's welfare. The case led to the dismissal of Sharon Shoesmith, the Director of Children's Services at Haringey Council, and the resignation of the council's leaders, George Meeham, and the cabinet member for children and young people, Liv Santry. The case prompted a review of child welfare policies in the UK, leading to the implementation of new guidelines and procedures intended to improve the child protection system. The Lambing report, conducted in the wake of Baby P's case, recommended comprehensive changes to enhance communication and procedures within and between the agencies responsible for child welfare. Tracy Connolly, Stephen Barker and Jason Owen were charged and found guilty of causing and allowing the death of a child. Trial revealed the horrific details of Peter's abuse and the system's failure to protect him. The sentences handed down to the perpetrators sparked public debate, with many feeling that the penalties were not severe enough. The story of Baby P serves as a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities of children and the imperative need for effective child protection services. It has led to ongoing discussions about how societies can better protect their most vulnerable members and ensure that tragic cases like that of Peter Connolly do not reoccur. The case has had a lasting impact on the child protection policies in the UK, leading to reforms aimed at strengthening the system and preventing future failures. It also serves as a call to action for individuals and communities to be more aware of and proactive in reporting signs of child abuse and neglect. The tragic story of Baby P underscores the critical importance of vigilance, compassion, and action in the protection of children.
We had a picture and now we have a name, Peter.
And I got to say sorry too, you know. I should have been there for him. I should have been. I was, but I wasn't allowed to be there.
Social workers have been sacked, ministers have acted, and reports have been written. But have we heard the whole story about Baby P?
Had that been disclosed, there is a very good chance, in my judgment, that that little boy would now still be alive.
It's not quite time to draw the curtain on the Baby P story, which threw child protection so dramatically back into the spotlight. Later this month, his mother, her boyfriend and their lodger will be sentenced for their part in making his short life so painful and so tragic. Tonight, we reveal more details from our own investigation, which sheds new light on just how much information social workers had about the family and raises new questions about why they couldn't save little Peter.
But we did not do no more to protect him.
And Peter's life of abuse put child protection across the country under scrutiny.
It is our first duty in government and as a society to do all we can to keep our children safe.
Later this month, the people responsible for Peter's death will be sentenced. For legal reasons, we still can't see the faces of his mother or her boyfriend. He was also found guilty last week of raping a little girl. Their lodger, Jason Owen, will also be sentenced over Peter's death. That might have been the closing chapter in the story of Baby P. But tonight, Panorama can reveal the story that hasn't been told. It centres on the boyfriend. Haringey Council has maintained he was hidden, making it impossible to assess the dangers Baby P faced. But was he really invisible? Peter was first taken to hospital in December 2006. He had a bump on his head and bruising across his nose. His mum claimed only she and his grandma looked after him. Both were arrested, and he was placed on the at-risk register. But how hard was this fractured family trying to hide the boyfriend? I've been to meet Peter's grandma. This is the first time she's spoken on television. She says social workers asked her about a man her daughter described as just a friend. She told them what she could, with her daughter listening upstairs.
But she did tell me not to mention the boyfriend. What I did say was he's there more often than me. Matter of fact, I wouldn't be surprised if he had moved in. Because I wasn't 100% sure. Because that time all his stuff wasn't in there at that time. You understand? It's only after this that he moved in properly.
Last November, Haringey told us they had no record of this conversation. As Panorama revealed then, almost immediately there were splits over the case. A senior social worker wanted Peter taken into foster care, but she was overruled. So he returned to his mother. The boyfriend was probably staying overnight by then. She's certainly telling chatroom friends about him.
No longer with my ex-husband. Have now met someone lovely.
Those who know the boyfriend say he's a loner with learning difficulties. He struggles with depression and has a fascination with knives and the Nazis. The grandma was worried and increasingly shut out of the family.
Everything he talked about was violence. That's all he ever talked about in my company was violence. My grandson started getting frightened of the boyfriend, and he was scared of the boyfriend. When the boyfriend come in the door and the boy would be over there, and I'd be here, he comes crawling over to me, scream for me to pick him up and hide behind me.
But is it just that early mention of the boyfriend that was missed? Panorama has discovered information that Haringey didn't reveal about Baby P's case and the missed opportunities to save him. These are the now disused offices where the social workers who were protecting Peter were based. Panorama has discovered that the social workers here were piloting a new way of working with the parents of at-risk children. It's called solution-focused brief therapy, and the idea is that rather than dwelling on a family's problems, these are the now disused offices where the social workers who were protecting Peter were based. Panorama has discovered that the social workers here were piloting a new way of working with the parents of at-risk children. It's called solution-focused brief therapy, and the idea is that rather than dwelling on a family's problems, you ask the parents what they would like their life to be like in the future. Then together you decide how to achieve that. This was in addition to the usual checks, but the risk of focusing on a parent's future is you may miss what's happening to their child now. I've been to Sweden to meet the international expert who took this approach and adapted it for child protection. Andrew Tennell stresses the dangers to a child must be constantly in your mind.
Solution focus gives you a lot of good skills, it gives you ways of engaging with families, but you must bring to the table very clearly what the problem is, and you must talk very clearly with the family about the past, about the harm to the child, the neglect, the maltreatment. And if you try and use solution focused without doing that, if you try and use it as a therapist would use it in the therapy room, it can very quickly become dangerous, particularly in high-risk cases.
His signs of safety approach puts the child's protection first. In Haringey, he sees little evidence that was happening. Social workers there have told us they did a 2-day course in solution-focused therapy. They say not much time was spent on assessing risk. Some called it useless. It didn't keep baby P safe either. Over 8 months, he was taken to hospital 3 times with suspicious injuries. Towards the end, he was losing weight, had scabs on his ears, fingers and head. But his mum seemed to be working well with social workers. How could they spot the man in the shadows, the hidden boyfriend? It's not like the mother sat down and told them about him, is it?
A child isn't constantly being observed. There isn't a video running in that home. There wasn't a way of knowing that there's a man hiding in the wardrobe.
A council. This was March 2007, 4 months before baby P died. Mrs. Gilmore says she put a detailed note of the interview on Peter's electronic case file, but it didn't mention it was videoed. There should have been checks on this friend. The police also needed to know. The abuse investigation into what happened to Peter in December was drifting. Former detective John Shatford wasn't involved in Peter's case, but until 2007 he headed the homicide team covering Haringey.
They're investigating injuries that this boy sustained. So they are going to be thinking, well, who else could have done that? And the mention of a man who's close to this woman would have meant that they would have wanted to speak to that man, if not to eliminate him from it, even as a witness, to say, well, how does she treat her children? What do you know about it?
But the police aren't told about the interview or the video. This friend wasn't questioned, and an important opportunity to save baby P is missed. 2 weeks later, Peter is taken to hospital for a second time. He has a large swelling on his head. As we revealed last autumn, the police investigating the original abuse allegations aren't told. Peter's 3rd visit to hospital was in June. Taken there by his social worker, he had worrying bruises. This time the police are told. From the office here, a number of key decisions were made after that hospital visit. We've seen police documents that reveal officers told Mrs. Gilmore they wanted baby P removed from home. They appear increasingly baffled when that doesn't happen. According to our information, a senior officer wrote in the police log, "The situation cannot continue." In response to the mother's claims that baby P fights with other children, he comments, "He's 15 months old. This is wrong," and continues, "I'm at a loss as to why our position is at variance to that held by social services. Our concerns for baby P are valid." As we revealed last autumn, there was a frank exchange of views between a senior police officer and a manager. That was Mrs. Gilmore. It's detailed in an internal police document written after Peter's death. It concludes social services may have been too parent-focused, allowing a rule of optimism.
When you start to get close to a parent and you see the good parts of that parent, you see the parts of the parent trying to be a good parent, then you start to overstate that and understate their weaknesses. And it is a well-known vulnerability.
Mrs. Gilmore was respected by her colleagues and left Haringey early last year of her own accord. She says she raised the question of removing Peter and requested a legal planning meeting, but major decisions were made by multi-agency. She says she raised the question of removing Peter and requested a legal planning meeting, but major decisions were made by multi-agency conferences, not by her. And the list of professionals who failed baby P is long. The police abuse investigation went nowhere. Haringey sent the mother to parenting classes. When she told the staff she was pregnant a month before Peter died, no one seems to have asked about the father or told social workers. And at the beginning of August, a paediatrician, Dr. Seba Al-Zayat, misses the last chance to save him. She doesn't spot his broken ribs. She may even have missed a broken back. At some point the following day, he's hit in the mouth so hard he swallows a tooth. The next morning, here in this room, Peter is found in his cot, dead. But he could have been saved if someone had spotted the abuser in the house. So how many times was the boyfriend missed? The grandma mentioned him. His Christian name is on the minutes of the first case conference. Peter's father told social workers he thought there was a boyfriend. A childminder sees him when Peter is dropped off. And then there's the video. After Peter's death, his mother and her boyfriend are arrested. A murder investigation starts. After such a tragedy, you'd expect that everyone would now want to find out the whole story. Detectives asked Haringey for all the information they had on the family. The police say even then they were told nothing about the existence of the video.
Of course it should have been handed over. It was entirely relevant. And in fact, you know, I'm for once in my life almost speechless here. It seems such a natural course that they would take, not only for the individual who made that video, but of course for Haringey Council. They knew that the research was going on. Why on earth didn't they say, here we are, we've got this extra material that will be relevant? Again, we should be talking about this little boy and finding out what happened to him now.
Mrs. Gilmore maintains details about the interview were recorded. Haringey says it was unaware of the video until this February conducted serious case reviews.
What happens if the serious case review is told nothing about this?
They give a false investigation into what went wrong. They can't possibly have an accurate idea if they're not told some of the most basic information.
Can we draw any conclusions from this about the system within Haringey and how it was working?
Well, it seems to have been not communicating well within itself because parts of it didn't know what other parts were doing.
Haringey Council now says solution-focused therapy was not appropriate in this case. In future, new approaches like this will be considered by an ethics committee. Mrs. Gilmore has told us she didn't complete the course and didn't meet Peter. Her coursework was destroyed before he died, as it contained confidential information. She says she told detectives about the interview with the mother in January 2008. The police say they weren't told about the video itself, or that it mentioned the boyfriend, so it wasn't part of the evidence in the murder trial. All contact with the family should be noted on a child's electronic file. Mrs. Gilmore's note about the interview was on it, but Panorama can reveal it wasn't on the file printout given to police. Haringey admits serious failings. It says improved management will reduce the risk of further failures to capture and disclose information, and they've made fundamental changes to child protection, but questions remain.
If people were manipulating information, or if they were denying information going to the independent scrutineers, that would be totally unprofessional, totally wrong, and I would want to see action immediately locally, and I'd demand action myself.
And are serious failings widespread around the country? The Secretary of State insists Haringey is one of just a few bad apples in the child protection barrel.
Well, we saw after the Baby P trial finished the detail of the serious case review. I was sufficiently concerned at that point to send in the inspectors. They did a very thorough report, and they came back with a report which was devastating about leadership, about management, about practice, and that's why I had to act. The fact is that in over 100 areas of the country, we have reports from Ofsted which have been good or outstanding.
So, according to the Minister, most parts of the country are good at protecting our children. But can he trust the judgments made by Ofsted, the inspectors who monitor child protection? Currently, just 8 authorities, including Haringey, are failing. But each week, 1 or 2 children, like Peter, die at the hands of a parent or carer. We've looked at hundreds of serious case reviews into such deaths, and how the inspectors rate an authority doesn't seem to say much about how a child is protected.
The evidence is that children die as often in failing authorities as in really good authorities. So whatever's going on that affects a child's risk of being killed is not at the moment being measured as in really good authorities. So whatever's going on that affects a child's risk of being killed is not at the moment being measured very effectively.
And Ofsted clearly didn't pick up on what was happening on the ground in Haringey. It was rated good at protecting children the year that Peter died. It was a different story when the government sent the inspectors back in after his mother and boyfriend were convicted.
This time Ofsted failed Haringey, and extracts from the inspectors' notebooks which we've obtained under a Freedom of Information request show why. They say performance data in children's social care is unreliable and in some important instances inaccurate.
Ofsted will now carry out yearly unannounced visits to local authorities. It will concentrate more on frontline practice. Many social workers tell us they're struggling right now with high caseloads and staff shortages.
I think at the front line in social work we're pretty close to a crisis, in the sense that I don't think, when you've got so many professionals saying at the front line, we are worried, we don't feel that what's going on is adequate and safe, then I think that's a serious concern.
I'm on my way to Surrey, a failing authority, but here social workers are so worried they're considering industrial action. They want to remain anonymous. They fear by speaking out they could lose their jobs.
My caseload is in excess of 20. You feel that you're doing an impossible job because you're having to spread yourself across a large number of families.
Surrey Council says caseloads are allocated after a detailed risk assessment and vulnerable children are the #1 priority. But social workers here are still dealing with more children than the overstretched social worker in baby P's case.
You can regularly see workers crying at work, paralysed because of the amount of work they've got to do. If you've got the time to be able to properly evaluate the situation, you can go back and think about that and think, well, actually, I need another check. Somebody else might have to go out for a second opinion. At the moment, they haven't got the time to do that, and that's why there's the dangers, not just in Surrey, but all over the country.
Surrey Council says although cases have risen, it's taken on more staff. It says Unison only represents a minority of its employees, and that some have found efforts to improve performance difficult to cope with. But we've heard the worries voiced here repeated around the country.
We've got an important job to try and do. And when you feel that the whole system is flawed, and that sometimes you don't feel that it's fit for purpose, and you can't actually do the job that you're meant to be doing, then it's no wonder that children's lives can be put at risk.
High caseloads and staff shortages are national problems. Nearly 2/3 of local authorities say they have difficulties recruiting children's social workers. In Haringey, when Peter was on the register, it's claimed there was a rise in children needing protection. Social workers struggled to cope. It's nothing new.
What was very misleading about Child P was it gave the media and the public the impression that this was something startlingly different or a departure from the norm. But actually, the rate of children who are being killed in this way hasn't changed. And the main reason it hasn't changed over the last 30 years is that we haven't addressed the fundamental causes.
Peter lived just streets away from the place where another child was tortured 9 years ago. Victoria Climbier's death in a tiny Haringey flat caused a national outcry. Lord Laming headed a public inquiry that listed many failings, it led to a new child protection system. The government policy called Every Child Matters promised vulnerable children would be safer. There were new departments, new IT systems, but still too few staff with too many cases. None of it helped Peter.
I think it's a really interesting question as to why we haven't made faster progress. If I think about the last 18 months in my job since I came to this new department for children, schools and families, the voice to me of teachers about what they wanted for the future of their profession has been loud and clear, from head teachers too. But from social workers, the social worker contribution professionally to the future of their profession and the public debates, to me, has been very silent.
Well,
and I partly,
they've wanted to put their viewpoints, and we didn't find it difficult to find people who
Yeah.
were desperate to talk.
I actually, in part, I hold my hands up and say we should have asked social workers to speak up more. But also I find, and I was in Haringey just last week talking to social workers, there hasn't been a strong enough sense of the profession and their voice and their demands and their views, and that's something which needs to change.
But who would speak out as a social worker? They know they're usually singled out for blame when things go wrong, whatever pressures they face. In Haringey, still reeling from the outcry that followed Victoria Climbier's death, we know staff were terrified by what might follow a second tragedy.
If you get it wrong, you need to know that you're going to be supported by your professional organisations, by your employers, and not hung out to dry. The danger that professionals discern of not being properly supported is they'll start making these decisions based on what's right for them or the organisation, when they should be making the decisions in terms of what's right for the child.
Last week, 4 more Haringey staff were sacked. Maria Ward, Peter's social worker, her immediate boss, Gilly Christou, Clive Priest, the service manager, and Cecilia Hitchin, Deputy Director of Children's Services. But even now, have we heard the whole story? Immediately after Peter's death, his electronic file was locked. It's a legal requirement to prevent what is now evidence in a police investigation being tampered with. Panorama has discovered that Peter's file was entered twice after it was locked. Haringey says an expert has checked and no changes were made. But police sources have told us it hasn't been forensically examined by an independent expert. Examined by an independent expert. And what have we learnt from Peter's death? Lord Laming, called in again, says the system protecting children nationally is the right one. A social work task force is examining frontline pressures. Yet again, the promise is things will get better.
Will it bring back the little boy who died in Haringey? No, I can't do that. But can we try to make sure that we don't repeat that kind of tragedy in future? Yes, we can.
Each time a child like Peter dies, we hear the words, never again. But how much confidence can we have that the same mistakes won't be made in the future?
If you ask me the question, is there any reason at the moment to think that the rate of child deaths is going to be any less than 30 years' time than it was 30 years ago? The answer is no.
Alison Holtz reporting. Later this week, the government will announce details of how it intends to improve child protection, and the summary of a new serious case review into the death of Peter is likely to be published in the summer.
The tragic case of baby P serves as a poignant reminder of the critical role that child protection services play in society and the devastating consequences when they fail. The widespread outrage and grief that followed Peter Connolly's death sparked a national conversation about the effectiveness of child welfare policies and the responsibilities of those tasked with safeguarding vulnerable children. The reforms that ensued aimed to address the systematic failures exposed by this case, with the hope of preventing such tragedies in the future. As we reflect on the lessons learned from Baby P's story, it's important to consider the ongoing challenges in child protection and the ways in which individuals and communities can contribute to the safety and well-being of children. This case underscores the need for vigilance, empathy, and action, reminding us that protecting vulnerable children is a collective responsibility. As we reflect on the case, it leaves us with the following questions. How can communities better support families at risk to prevent child abuse and neglect? What role can individuals play in enhancing the effectiveness of child protection systems? In what ways can we ensure that the reforms made in the wake of tragedies like Baby P's are effectively implemented and sustained? How can the lessons learned from this case inform future policies and practices in child welfare? What steps can be taken to improve communication and collaboration between the various agencies responsible for child protection? Engaging with these questions can help us all contribute to a safer, more compassionate society where the welfare of children is a shared priority.
Most people in the high street mistake the bursts of gunfire for fireworks, but Carl Harries knows better. Trained in weapons by the army, he recognises an automatic rifle.
As I got closer, I could quite clearly see that he had a pistol in his hand and he had a gun over his shoulder. He turned around and he pointed the gun up towards the two houses here. And at this stage then, I thought, you know, there's something obviously wrong. I remember backing into the hedge and just sort of staying there. Everything went completely silent. Okay, there was no noise, there was nothing. And I don't know how long that was for. It seemed ages, and my heart was going like mad and everything.
I'm wanting to see Ryan so we could put an end to it all. If he fired at us when we're in the helicopter, at least then, by law, I was entitled to fire back.
The Hungerford Massacre, a chilling episode in British history, began on the afternoon of August the 19th, 1987, in the small town of Hungerford, Berkshire, England. This tragic event, perpetrated by 27-year-old Michael Robert Ryan, marked one of the most horrific shooting sprees in the United Kingdom, setting in motion a series of events that would forever change the nation's perspective on gun control. Michael Ryan, the gunman, was a resident of Hungerford, described by those who knew him as a solitary figure with an intense interest in firearms. Ryan was legally in possession of several weapons, including a Beretta pistol, a Zabala shotgun, and an M1 carbine semi-automatic rifle. The massacre commenced at Ryan's home. In a disturbing start to his rampage, Ryan shot and killed his mother, Dorothy Ryan. This act marked the beginning of his several-hour-long spree of violence. After leaving his home, Ryan, armed with his weapons, ventured into the town. He first targeted his neighbours, shooting them in their own backyard. Ryan then moved methodically through the streets of Hungerford, displaying a seemingly random but lethal intent. The small community, unaccustomed to such violence, was caught completely off guard. The residents and visitors alike was suddenly thrust into a state of terror and confusion. The sound of gunfire echoed through the streets, a chilling reminder of the danger that was unfolding. The early stages of the massacre saw multiple casualties. Ryan shot at people in their homes, on the streets, and in their cars. These initial moments were marked by chaos, as people struggled to comprehend the gravity of the situation and sought safety wherever they could find it. The local police, unprepared for an incident of this magnitude and nature, especially given the general unarmed status of British police at the time, faced significant challenges in responding effectively. The community's sense of safety was shattered as the horror of the situation became increasingly apparent. In these initial stages, the Hungerford Massacre established itself in the event of unprecedented tragedy in the UK, a dire situation that necessitated an urgent and significant response from emergency services and law enforcement agencies. The beginning phase of the massacre laid the foundation for the tragic day that would end with 16 people losing their lives and 15 others being injured, making it one of the deadliest mass shootings in the UK at the time. The events of this day would not only leave a lasting scar on the hometown of Hungerford, but also initiate significant changes in national gun legislation and police response strategies.
On a summer's day in 1987, a quiet English town became the victim of a one-man killing spree. Scenes in this film reconstruct events based on the eyewitness accounts of those involved. Their testimony is real, and the calls for the emergency services were actually made on the day. The driver is a regular, always stopping at the same pump and putting exactly the same amount of petrol into his car. Ian George is at the other pump.
Someone pulled in behind me and sort of exchanged smiles. And then he went to the back of the car. And I just slowly sort of togged up and got ready to go.
The driver of the Astra is waiting for Ian to leave.
I heard a loud bang from behind me, so I looked back over my left shoulder. I guessed it was an armed robbery. I needed to call the police. It was only afterwards I realised how frightened I must have actually been at that point.
No one else is aware of the real drama that is about to unfold. This is the start of the worst massacre in England. "30 miles away from the petrol station, the police canteen in Newbury is serving lunch. PC Jim Wood and PC Roger Brereton always travel together in their Blues and Twos traffic car. Today would be different.
He was a good mate. We used to socialise a lot. I knew his wife and his boys very well.
The gunman doesn't realise that the magazine of his rifle has fallen off. There is only one bullet in the chamber, and he's fired it.
Hello, I believe there may be an armed robbery going on at the outstation between Foxford and Marlborough. Okay, what's your name, please? Ian George.
I felt that if I could get to the police quick enough, then if they approached it at both ends, they could probably he wouldn't get away.
But Ian George's call comes too late. The gunman has left the petrol station and is now driving towards Hungerford. The call is relayed to Newbury Police Station.
Jim, got a call that came. What we got? Got armed robbery at the Foxfield, at the old petrol station.
Hang on. I need this file for court.
I sorted out the file that the chap wanted. Roger said, I'll go in one car and you can follow along in the other.
Roger Brereton and Jim Wood are told to find and intercept the silver Astra. What they don't know is that this is much more serious than an armed robbery. The gunman is just 2 minutes away from the centre of the small Berkshire market town. In the residential area of Southview, it's quiet. Julie Jackson has finished work for the day.
I got to the corner here and I met one person that I knew. We stood and had a chatter, and with that, Michael Ryan came up round the corner. We knew he liked his fast cars, but not to drive at the speed he was driving that day. It didn't seem to be his thing.
Julie Jackson knows the driver well. It's Michael Ryan, who lives with his widowed mother, Dorothy, at number 4.
I knew Michael. He used to come into the house and, well, I was friends with my eldest boy.
He was bullied, and instead of facing up to the bullying, he would back off. And so, therefore, he really did become a bit of a recluse like that. He didn't associate with too many children at all.
If you look at the people who've been involved in similar kind of tragedies, then they do seem to have some characteristics in common with Michael. They tend to be loners, they tend to be underachievers, they tend to be people who develop an interest in fantasy because it seems an easier way of trying to establish a position for yourself.
Michael Ryan's passion in life is guns, and he belongs to 2 gun clubs. All his weapons are licensed and legal. He's never been in trouble with the police. Consultant psychiatrist Richard Badcock has analysed Michael Ryan's behaviour on the day.
People have wondered if the car had started, whether events would have taken a different course. It's very unlikely that he would have done anything substantially different. It's possible that different people would have been shot, but the general course of events, I think, would have still have been the same.
Ryan is setting out deliberately to kill. He is heavily armed with a Kalashnikov, an automatic rifle and a Beretta pistol. 2 doors down, Roland and Sheila Mason are in their garden. Julie Jackson hears the shots that kill her neighbours, but thinks Michael is only playing around with an air rifle.
I got up by the house of Michael Ryan's, stared at me actually, as he got out of the car. Can't describe the look he had on his face. A look of madness.
Ryan is stalking Julie Jackson, but instead of shooting her dead, he fires at the ground.
Well, I decided I'd move a bit quicker. I thought, well, if he's got an air rifle out here, I don't want to know anything about it. I turned quite quick and went in round the side of the house and into the house. And I looked out the window and there was Michael Ryan shooting everything he could find up the lane. I thought he was intending to kill most of his neighbours.
He chose neighbours as a group. I don't think he had sort of individual grudges. I think it was a general sense of frustration and anger and contempt for the ordinary life around him that he wasn't part of.
As Ryan arrives at number 13, he aims at 2 teenage girls. Only one of them escapes.
Hello, can I have an ambulance, please? I can't tell you what the problem is, but there's an awful lot of blood.
The BT operator puts the call through to Newbury Police. Because the system's so old, there are only 2 999 lines into the police switchboard. Today, it's going to be pushed beyond its limit. Back in Southview, Julie Jackson has once more become a target. This time, Michael Ryan intends to kill her.
And he must have seen a shadow of me moving in the house. The glass was going out of my window, shattering, and holes in the wall and in the ceiling. burning pain. Yeah, obviously I knew that I'd been shot in the back. I mean, it was the lower part of the back I was shot in.
Police emergency.
There's a gunman up here. He's going mad. He's petrified up here. Well, I'm shot anyhow.
Right, who are you?
I'm Mrs. Jackson. I'm dead too.
There's an ambulance on the way.
The police and ambulance service are both alerted by the BT exchange.
As it was school holidays, we thought it may have been something to do with children playing with a gun, with an air rifle or something like that. All that we thought we were responding to was an isolated, simple shooting incident, nothing more than that.
Adrian Coggins and Derek Whiting don't know there's a gunman with a lethal weapon on the loose. They are now heading directly into the danger zone. Newbury police pass the information on to Police HQ in Kidlington, who radio Jim Wood and Roger Brereton.
Roger was in the car in front of me, probably about 2 or 3 miles ahead of me, just on the outskirts of Newbury. The call come up saying that there's a bloke been seen walking down Southview in Hungerford with what was reported to be a rifle, and could possibly be connected with the incident at Froxhill service station.
Even though both reports mention a weapon, they still think this could be an everyday incident.
Because of the amount of shooting, the pheasant shoots, vermin shoots, etc., it didn't really strike us odd that someone would have reported seeing someone walking in a road in Hungerford with a gun. I mean, I rightly or wrongly assumed it was a shotgun.
In fact, the gunman is carrying deadly assault weapons, whose bullets can penetrate a brick wall from half a mile. In 1987, 8,000 semi-automatic weapons are legally owned in Britain.
Asked to talk direct to Roger in his car. You know your area, and so you know your best plan of attack. And on this occasion, it was obvious that we needed to contain both ends of the road.
The officers know that Southview is a cul-de-sac, with a path at one end leading onto Hungerford Common. Jim Wood agrees to cut across the common. Roger Brereton approaches Southview from the main road.
I was bleeding badly. I managed to crawl to the telephone, which was in the same room that I happened to be in.
This time, Julie Jackson manages to call her husband, Ivor. While she is on the phone, Ryan runs back along the path to the common. As Ken Clements walks down the path, he's warned by his neighbour, Ray Morley, that someone is shooting. But he thinks there must be an innocent explanation.
Police emergency.
There's somebody firing a gun up the road.
Yeah.
And I've seen women run down the road screaming. In Hungerford, over the common towards the call. Northview High, I'm picking the call, and he shot some guy over there.
Police emergency. We have a shooting, yeah, over Hungerford Common, and a Mr. K.G. Clements, I think, has been shot.
For the men on the Newbury switchboard, the scale of the disaster is becoming apparent. But there are so many calls coming in, it takes time to get the information up to Police HQ.
Police emergency.
This was just of huge proportions of the number of people trying to make 999 calls. You know, so many of them all at once. And when the calls are coming so fast, you can just imagine trying to handle that.
Well, this is the second time in the last 2 minutes. Can I have the police? Bear with us.
As Roger Brereton drives towards Southview, Michael Ryan heads back from the common.
like an automatic rifle.
PC Brereton's radio picks up a warning from headquarters. It comes too late. But he does manage to call for help.
As I started driving up this bit, that's when I heard Roger call up a couple of times and say that he'd actually been shot. So I called up to the control room and said, can you call him and confirm? And they tried calling him several times and there was no response. We couldn't make contact with him. So I was very, very anxious. And that's when I first heard the gunshots. Just flashed through my mind momentarily. It just sounded like what you used to hear on the news at Beirut when they was discharging the weapons. The first thing I saw was the body of Mr. Clements laying about 10-15 feet up the alley with quite a severe chest wound. And the young lad with him, which turned out to be his son. And then as I looked further down the footpath there, I could see Roger's car parked further down on the road in Southview. And as I watched, I could see the guy there with his camouflage suit on. And he got a handgun and he was firing, walking around the patrol car, firing into it.
Ryan systematically empties both the Kalashnikov and his Beretta pistol into the police car. He fires a total of 23 bullets.
Don't know how to describe it really, just disbelief. I suppose a little bit of terror. You know, I don't think, in all honesty, since that day, a day goes past when sometime or the other you don't think about it. Reflect on it and think, could I have done something different? And I lost a good friend here. Very good friend. That was the day, wasn't it? That was circumstances of the day.
Jim Wood calls for full armed backup. It's routed to police headquarters in Kidlington, 40 miles away.
We've now got a report of at least one person shot dead, maybe more. I think it may be at that point that he mentioned something about a police officer. We don't really know, but and I'm thinking, oh dear, this is serious stuff.
Assistant Chief Constable Charles Pollard takes command of the incident. He needs to get to the scene as soon as possible.
My responsibility is to be the person who authorises the use of police actually having guns to go there and to deal with the situation, and to take responsibility for whatever happens.
But unfortunately, he discovers his tactical firearms squad are on a routine training exercise in Otmoor, 45 miles away from Hungerford.
We're on, boys. That's it, guys, we're on. Yeah.
Hungerford is one of the most remote towns in the Thames Valley police area. Today, the tactical firearms team are at least an hour away. Charles Pollard monitors the police radio for more information on the gunman.
So you're picking up bits and pieces and trying to make sense of it. And it's never with great clarity, but what was very clear was a police officer has been shot dead. That's very serious. That other people, at that time we thought perhaps just 2 or 3 others had been shot, probably killed. That we don't know who's done this, but it's someone with a rifle and maybe other guns. That person is on the loose, but we've got no firearms people to respond to them anyway. So it's a very, very frightening scenario to be going into.
Unknown to Charles Pollard, there is armed help closer at hand. Police weapons instructor Ernest Holloway was also listening in on the police radio when he heard Roger Brereton's call for help.
And then I heard, Roger, 10-9, 10-9, I've been shot. They were his exact words. I mean, if it had been a complete stranger, it wouldn't have hit so hard. But Roger, say, being a neighbour and a friend, Yes, it was a shock. And my immediate reaction then was, get down there.
Ryan started walking down the alley towards us, and he stopped, and we sort of made eye contact. See him now, see him walking down there now, yeah.
PC Jim Wood now becomes a target himself.
And he lifted up his Kalashnikov to the waist and just fired it towards us.
He's incredibly lucky. Ryan's Kalashnikov is lethal at 300 yards.
Just like bees buzzing past you, either side of you. Then it sort of hit home. Christ, this bloke's firing at me. Time to go, Todd. So we got in the car.
Despite the risk, Jim Wood drives across the common to warn some families who are picnicking that their lives are in danger.
And I could see in me wing mirrors I went across the common, Ryan going right up the hedge line into that corner. I was sort of keeping an eye back the other way to see where Ryan was, and whether he was holed up in the hedge or gone through, I don't know. I decided that we needed to set up a roadblock to stop any other vehicles coming onto the common.
But Ryan is not taking cover in the hedge. After firing at the police car, he moves off. The chance to contain the gunman slips away.
Some people been shooting about at South View. Thanks very much. It seems to be getting closer and I'm getting frightened.
The police roadblock stops cars getting onto the common, but the streets at the front end of Southview still allow access to traffic. It leaves the way open for more cars to drive into the line of fire.
My sort of initial thought, and I think probably my mum's initial thought, was that he was something to do with the police car. The bullets came through the bonnet of the car and into me there in my thigh. He then moved over to that side of the vehicle towards my mum. She was just completely covered from head to toe in glass, and she'd been shot in the left shoulder. It was just such an intense, sharp, burning sensation. I think the ammunition that he was using had run out on us, so Mum put the car in reverse and we rolled backwards down Southview.
Even though Alison Chapman is bleeding heavily and their car is in serious trouble, they escape before Ryan reloads.
The people were hit in the car, but the lady drove off. But there was her daughter beside her was lying actually on the seat.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Hello? Ambulance. It seems my husband's been shot. There's been some bangs round here. My husband's in the garden, been shot. For God's sake, hurry.
You say your husband's been shot?
Yes, I'm trying to get to him. I don't know what's happened. He's 84. Oh, well, I'll go out to him. He's moaning. Okay.
The 999 call-out has also gone to a local ambulance crew. As they reverse into Southview, Ryan is waiting.
Ambulance control.
Hello, it's Treble 1. Sorry, I've been shot.
Where are you at the moment?
We're on scene at Southview.
All right, Hazel, we're getting somebody down.
For God's sake, all I'm worried about is don't let 211 anywhere near the scene.
211 is the ambulance from Newbury.
We were told that we were second crew. My colleagues were already there on scene in Southview. They looked like there was a house on fire or something was on fire. It seemed more serious than what it was from the initial call we were getting. Obviously, we didn't have mobile phones at that stage or anything else. We had to rely on the radios in the ambulances. But the nearer we got to Hungerford, the worse radio reception became.
Because of the telephone congestion, the warning from their colleagues isn't passed on. Ryan's mother Dorothy is also driving towards Southview, on her way back from a job interview.
Events like this never arrive out of the blue. Something would have happened immediately before the event. Might have been his mother going for a job interview, because that would have changed the relationship between them.
Julie Jackson's husband, Ivor, is minutes away.
We got to the corner and I said, "Stop here." I said, "I'll walk up." He said, "No, we'll drive straight up there." All hell let loose. Bullets was coming in from the left-hand side of the car, which I was in. That's why I said I'm lucky to be alive. And I must have had a ricochet off of something to come back into my ear, because I was coming in that way, and they went in that right ear. It's frightening. You just sit there and shake, don't you? You try to curl down as best you can and get out of it, but you couldn't. That was it.
As Dorothy Ryan reaches the bottom of her road, her neighbour, Mr. Noon, flags her down.
Stop, Dorothy, stop! Hold on, wait!
But she accelerates past him. Her son is expecting her.
She doted on Michael, and I think she tried to give him everything that he wanted. But the fantasies that Michael developed, things like Michael being engaged, or the story that there was a rich colonel who had taken a personal interest in Michael, he probably cast them so as to make his mother feel better about him. And of course, once you embark on that, it gets quite difficult to get out of. And not necessarily a tragedy is waiting, but something is waiting. You know, some sort of crisis is going to develop.
"10 miles away in Savernake Forest, Myra Rose is unaware of what's been happening in Hungerford.
I just sat down with a book, and these two little kids came along. And they told me, "I'm Hannah, and this is my brother James, and he's 2 and I'm 4. They said, "Man in black killed my mummy." And we're going home. I know where I live. It's the house with the blue door. Now, you know, what do you do when the kid says that to you? There's one thing I know. I knew I wasn't going to let them go, and I had one in each hand. It seemed such a horrendous story. It didn't seem true. And I thought that they were playing hide and seek with their mother. That's what I thought. I took them back to a party who were picnicking, and we stayed there until the policewomen came along.
Police from the Wiltshire force find an abandoned car. The children's mother is discovered 30 yards away. She's been fatally shot. Now there are 2 manhunts underway by Thames Valley and Wiltshire police. They have no idea they are pursuing the same suspect. When Michael Ryan stopped at the petrol station, he was on his way back from Savernake Forest.
The choice of a young lady who was enjoying family life, I think that was deliberate. He was trying to get back at life for robbing him of the chance of having a similar relationship himself.
The Assistant Chief Constable is still half an hour away from Hungerford. Headquarters pass on some disturbing information.
Because his guns were legal, ironically, we can find out what he's got. Now, in one sense, to know what he got was frightening. I mean, I didn't actually know myself, I think, that the implications of our firearms legislation at the time was such that someone could have such a lethal weapon as a Kalashnikov. So it's nice to know, but wow, frightening.
The man in charge of the operation now knows who the gunman is and what weapons he's carrying. But he still doesn't know where the gunman has gone.
I was still conscious at the time. And then Mrs. Ryan came walking up the road. And she said, "Oh, not you as well, Ivor." Because she couldn't do a lot for me. And then went on the road and...
Michael! Michael, stop it! I heard a shout at Michael, tell him to stop it. But obviously he'd done so much damage then that he just turned on her.
And she got as far as our drive. And the bullets started flying again, and I see Mrs. Ryan fall.
I don't think myself that he planned to shoot his mother. Although when she turned up on the scene, he didn't hesitate before shooting her. All the things that were important to him, he shot and destroyed.
Killing his mother slows the pace of the shootings. Ryan moves away from the built-up housing area and onto the playing fields.
He chose that route deliberately, and I think that was probably part of a process of calming himself down.
The tactical firearms team is still more than 35 miles away, and Ryan is now moving towards the playground and open-air swimming pool. It's the summer holidays, and about 20 children are playing outside. Dean Lavisher is one of them.
The first thing that I knew about it was noticing the gentleman walking through the entrance and seeing like the dust marks around by his feet, like puffs of dust.
Of course, the first thing I thought was some kids were throwing bangers. All of a sudden he went down on his side.
The pathway just filled up instantly with blood. And we, subconsciously, something's not right. I suppose we sort of stayed. We felt reasonably safe up this slide because it had bars around the top of it, so we felt safe up there. The first we knew of Ryan was when we sort of saw his feet appear beneath the branches. So we got a slow view of him, started with feet, legs, with the rifles in both arms. He had a very blank look about him, as though he'd done that sort of thing every day.
So I got halfway down the slide and just leapt over the side, landed on one foot, and that was it. It was like a stampede then. It was like everyone bolting for my house, except I was the slowest. I was at the back.
I saw Ryan just shooting at point-blank range, and that was just a glance to my left as I was going past very quickly.
Cameron?
Yes, can you come out to have a sprinkle?
What's the problem?
It's an emergency, so I was just a shock.
Yeah, who are you, please?
Dean Lavisher.
What's your phone number, lovey?
No.
Yes.
They put the phone down, I'm afraid.
Ken Hall lives in the house next to the swimming pool.
I could see Ryan walking down with a gun on his shoulder. I didn't say anything to him because, I guess I was possibly scared.
Ken can also see the local taxi driver, Marcus Barnard, on his way to pick up a fare.
As he came down in his taxi, I looked at Ryan, and Ryan up with his gun and put 5 or 6 shots into Marcus's car. I was thinking, this is unreal. This can't be happening in Hungerford. It just can't be. I then saw Ryan. This is what always gets me. I could see Ryan then take the gun down, look at it, and he had a look of... It was a frown, I can recall that. A look of disbelief. I can see that. It was either the gun had jammed, he run out of bullets, or what the heck am I doing? And with that, he literally threw the gun down. And I got to about here, and then Ryan turned round quite quickly, and as he did, I saw he had a pistol in his right hand. He fired 2 shots at me, missed, and with that, I mean, I was like this. I turned and back into the pool area.
I was in the window there, and I could see all the way down the driveway. And as Ken was coming back this way, I saw the bloke with the gun. He turned and went back and picked the gun up. I was scared. I was screaming at him to get back indoors.
I could see Liz in the bedroom, and I was literally screaming, get an ambulance, get the doctor, get the nurses, get someone to help.
Yes, emergency, quickly, please. What do you want? I want an ambulance and the police again, quickly. There's a man going mad with a gun going down the road shooting people and he shot the taxi driver.
Ambulances have been called in response to the 999 calls. One of them slips through the police cordon.
As we turned the corner, we could see a police car about 50 metres in front of us with all of its windows shot out. There was another car which was crashed into the side of it, and at that stage it really hit us the seriousness of the incident. We could hear gunshots. They were all coming from the right-hand side. It was like a loud cracking sound. I walked round this side of the police car, leant in through the driver's window to check for a pulse, but the policeman was dead. The poor chap was still clutching the microphone at the time. I looked at the car beside me, which had 2 casualties in it, two men in it. One was the driver, but he was dead. He'd been shot quite a number of times. I switched the engine off of the car and looked across to the passenger. I thought he was dead. He'd been shot in the head and the chest. Walked round the car and checked him for a pulse, and at that moment he woke up.
Well, I thought I was gone, to be honest. I'd nearly give up hope. Well, I'd give up hope, I think. He thought I was dead, but I wasn't. He saved my life. I thank him for that.
There was a lady laid here. She had been shot quite a number of times. She was dead also.
It was Dorothy Ryan.
There were 2 more people that had been shot in one of the houses in front of us. One was a young girl, the other was a woman. The girl had been shot in the legs, the woman had been shot in the back.
The sight I see actually as I was going out to the ambulance was horrific. It was just like a war zone. I mean, the quiet place where we were living, you don't expect to see bodies around that we see that day.
The only person who can stop the gunman now is another armed man. Ernest Holloway heads for Jim Wood's rendezvous point on the Common.
I heard 5 shots, very fast shot, bang, 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 bang. It was obviously a high-powered rifle.
He now knows what he's up against.
From there, any reasonable rifle shot could have dropped us easily.
His own high-powered sniping rifle is a match for Ryan's Kalashnikov, but it's locked in a cupboard in Newbury Police Station. Getting it released will take time.
It gave me a lot of frustration because my sole aim was to try to stop him shooting and killing people. And I just didn't have the wherewithal to do it.
9 people are dead, including Ernest's friend and colleague, Roger Brereton. But Ernest Holloway is trapped on the common. All he can do is wait for the helicopter to help him pinpoint the gunman. Unfortunately, the helicopter is in for repairs. While he waits, the gunman is stalking the maze of streets on the other side of the common. One family has avoided the police cordon at the bottom end of the high street. Kidlington HQ has drafted in officers from outside the area to man the roadblocks. They don't realise that anyone with local knowledge knows the shortcuts that will allow them to double back into the housing estate. Anyone who takes that shortcut today risks their life. At the far end of Hungerford High Street, Carl Harries is shopping.
I was on leave from the army, you know, my car needed some work doing it. I was walking to get the parts from the car shop. It was just an ordinary day. There was nothing different about it at all.
A car has driven past the roadblock at the bottom of the high street and is taking the back route into the housing estate. Ryan is cutting down a nearby alley, shooting as he goes. Most people in the high street mistake the bursts of gunfire for fireworks, but Carl Harries knows better. Trained in weapons by the army, he recognises an automatic rifle.
As I got closer, I could quite clearly see that he had a pistol in his hand and he had a gun over his shoulder. He turned around and he pointed the gun up towards the two houses here. And at this stage then I thought, you know, there's something obviously wrong. I remember backing into the hedge and just sort of staying there. Everything went completely silent. Okay, there was no noise, there was nothing. And I don't know how long that was for. You know, it seemed ages and my heart was going like mad and everything.
Sandra Hill is now driving straight towards Ryan.
There's somebody just down the road with a gun shooting at the junction of Priory Road and Salisbury Road.
Charles Pollard finally arrives in Hungerford.
Well, I'm just remembering the ball of ice in my stomach as we're arriving in this small town with what we knew at the time. We went straight to Hungerford Police Station to find that, first of all, it was all being renovated. My job was to try and set up a forward control point in this police station, so we've got one room at the back, hopeless, it's full of people, just two telephones, so I've got to commandeer a phone. The lifeblood of any operation like this is the communications, and normally you need about 3 or 4 different communications channels to deal with the huge amount of traffic. You need a command channel, you need an operations channel for your traffic cars and the people in the cordons, probably another channel for the local offices. You certainly need the capacity for people to talk together. That you know things are happening, you know you're supposed to be in charge, and you just haven't got any information. You just haven't got a handle on what's happening. It's really pretty desperate.
The police helicopter has been rushed out of the repair bay.
I don't even really think the helicopter repairs have been completed. The helicopter pilot, so myself, has taken quite a risk. The idea was that if we spotted Ryan, they could put me down at a safe spot and direct me to where he might be so that I could go and try and deal with it. That was the plan.
Ernest Holloway is still only armed with his short-range weapon, but is prepared to risk his life and take a shot at Ryan, even though he knows Ryan's Kalashnikov could down the helicopter from 300 yards. Just when he's desperate for an accurate sighting on Ryan's position, the communications confusion reaches a critical point.
You know, we were going from one side of Hungerford to the other. So many different reports. If somebody was saying he's outside my door now, By the time they got through on the 999 system, and that got through to headquarters, and that got through then on the radio to us, completely out of date. So basically we didn't have a clue where he was.
Even though the police marksman can't see the gunman, Ryan's response to the helicopter is chilling. Further down Priory Road, Carl Harries finds Sandra Hill.
We carried her across, laid her on the grass. It was obvious from her injuries that she wasn't going to make it. And there's a house just over here, and I remember two old people coming out, and the lady gave me a small plastic-type car first aid kit. You know, I remember thinking to myself, well, this is no good here, but thanks ever so much. The lorry came flying down the road like mad and pulled up. And I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "It's all hell in let loss up there. Someone's shooting." I decided to go up there and have a look, and if I could help, I could help.
But Carl Harries has no idea what is ahead of him. Ernest Holloway's sniping rifle has arrived. He now has a weapon to match Michael Ryan's.
My shooting ability against him, I would have backed myself 100 times out of 100. This might sound boasting, but I have never found anybody that could outshoot me.
But he still has no location for the gunman. All he can do is comb the area.
I'm wanting to see Ryan so we could put an end to it all. If he fired at us when we're in the helicopter, at least then, by law, I was entitled to fire back.
While the marksman carries on searching, the wounded are desperate for medical attention.
We've got 2 people shot here. Yeah, and one is very, very seriously ill. We can't get any ambulance anywhere near any of the casualties. He is still firing indiscriminately.
Carl Harries is still trying to save lives. He's told there may be casualties inside one of the houses.
And as I came across to the house, okay, the door at the time was a white frame door with complete glass in the middle, and I could see the whole of the glass had been shot away. And then I could hear somebody saying, help, help. Not really loud, just nice and quiet, and I was saying, hello, hello, and trying to work out where they were. If he's in there and I walk in there, I'm doomed to failure, basically. And it was unbelievable. It was something I'd never seen in my life. There was blood absolutely everywhere. There was this lady, and her husband was basically laying across her. It was obvious to me that he was trying to protect his wife. I was trying to patch her up, and she was just going on about her husband. I said, no, he's fine, he's fine. And she was like, Jack, Jack. And in the end, I was just honest with her and said, look, he's gone. There's nothing you can do about him. Just worry about you.
Yes, hello. We've got a male and a female badly shot up, okay, both of them. And your name, sir? Mr. C. Harries. Keep pressure on the wound if you can, to slow the bleeding. There's too many of them, mate.
I went outside, and I remember saying, who's next? And it seemed to be like that. Who's next?
Get the police up there on Cold Harbour Road immediately. The chap with the gun is coming up Priory Road.
9 separate reports of Ryan's location have been passed on to Charles Pollard.
Police emergency. There's a madman in Tarrantville with a gun.
All the sightings conflict.
It could be 20, 30 minutes before they've got through. What they're reporting may have also got distorted over time. They're frightened, so the report is often quite jumbled. What you end up with is just a myriad of bits of information.
Hello?
We have seen him go across the end of the Hungerford Road towards the Jonagaunt School.
Jonagaunt? How long ago was that, please?
4 minutes, 5 minutes.
4 or 5 minutes ago.
Things were coming to a conclusion, so I think he was then looking for somewhere where he could make his last stand.
At 2:15, the tactical firearms team arrive in Hungerford. Charles Pollard decides to focus on 3 areas: Hungerford Common, Southview, and the John O'Gaunt School.
And it's a very slow process, very frustrating. We couldn't allow our firearms teams to walk through the streets because they'd be shot dead straight away from a sniper with a high-powered rifle. So this is unprecedented, the slowness with which you can safely do anything. But you just had to be patient.
The tactical team are ordered to within striking distance of the gunman. Ken and Liz Hall watch as a group of armed police make their way towards their house.
We really did think that we were in danger. I remember the thing that went through my mind was the Iranian embassy siege, you know, when they jumped over the walls and that. It was that sort of thing. Terrible.
If you're going to approach him, you've got to be incredibly careful how you do that. You just don't walk in. I mean, imagine the worst-case scenario where we'd sent our firearms team and we'd lost half of them all shot dead. We then haven't even got a response team to deal with the situation.
As Ernest Holloway flies over the John O'Gaunt School, he realises he's being shot at. The shots are also heard by the men on the ground.
Can you confirm this location, Alice? John O'Gaunt School. We believe it's John O'Gaunt School they came from. Sorry, we're right across our side of the field. We only heard the shots. Received.
I've confirmed visual. Confirmed visual.
The sweetest news was the fact that we know it is one gunman, he is in the school, and we have him contained. You can then see the end, which is critical.
Just after 5 o'clock, the police hear the gunman's voice for the first time.
Mr. Ryan, can you hear me?
Yes.
You're surrounded by armed police. Do exactly as you're told and you'll come to no harm. Do you understand?
Yes.
What weapons do you have with you, Mr. Ryan?
One 9mm pistol and ammunition.
Their strategy is to talk Ryan out of the building without any more shots being fired.
I also have a grenade.
Mr. Ryan, do not come to the window with the grenade. Do you understand?
Yes.
Mr. Ryan, I want you to leave all your weapons in that room. Do you understand?
My pistol's tied to my wrist with a lanyard. I have 1 round of ammunition.
And what comes through is a sense of being lost, a sense of confusion, a sense of wondering himself what it was all about.
I must know about my mother.
I will try to find out about your mother. Just bear with me.
She's dead, isn't she? That's why you won't tell me.
I think I counted 10 references to asking about his mother in tones of urgency, you know, demanding to know how she was. And yet clearly he knew she was dead.
I didn't mean to kill her. It was a mistake.
I don't think he was clear in his own mind why it was so important to him to make sure that she was dead once he'd shot her. Possibly it was an expression of the particular kind of closeness that he had with his mother.
What are the casualty figures?
I don't know. Obviously you shot a lot of people.
Hungerford must be a bit of a mess.
Ryan's attack has left Hungerford in a state of devastation.
It's funny how small things stick in your mind. I remember seeing a police officer with a tin of red paint painting circles around the shells.
16 people are dead. 15 others are seriously wounded. The fire, started earlier by Michael Ryan, has destroyed his house and 4 others.
For me, I thought that we completely screwed up because I just felt helpless for most of the afternoon. It's a bit like a nightmare. You just can't collect the information. You can't get control to manage something. So I'm thinking, this has just been awful. My own part in this is terrible too. It's when I arrived the next day and they told me what had happened because of the complete communications problems, that I thought, actually we did okay.
For those unlucky enough to have crossed Ryan's path, there is a terrible price to pay. Jim Wood breaks the news to Roger's wife.
Used to be part of the police service. You take death messages to people and tell people that their sort of loved ones have died or whatever, but that was just bloody awful.
I left the police force because I was so angry that this had happened. It had been allowed to happen. We could do nothing about it at the time. A year later I had a breakdown and I wanted to get away.
Ivor Jackson has never returned to the home that he and Julie shared for 21 years.
There's too much happened around my doorstep, I'm afraid. No, I couldn't go back there.
We had some terrible times. But I mean, we're together, that's the main thing.
What time is it?
6:45. What do you want to know the time for?
I want to think about it.
Mr. Ryan!
I think Britain grew up as a result of Hungerford in some ways. The realisation this could happen in a market town, in fun-loving England where we don't have guns, where the police aren't armed. That changed policing and in one sense it changed society forever.
In conclusion, the Hungerford Massacre of August the 19th, 1987 remains a dark and gloomy chapter in British history. The actions of Michael Robert Ryan on that tragic day brought untold suffering to the small town of Hungerford and shook the nation to its core. The massacre not only claimed 16 innocent lives, but left 15 others injured. It also left an undeniable mark on the community, forever altering the lives of those directly and indirectly affected. The aftermath of this catastrophe led to profound changes in the UK's gun laws and policing policies, raising critical questions about firearm regulation and emergency response to mass shooting incidents. Is a somber reminder of the devastating impact of gun violence and the importance of vigilance in community safety and legislation. As we reflect on this tragic event, consider the following questions. How do you think the changes in gun laws following the Hungerford Massacre have impacted public safety in the UK? Could similar measures be effective in other countries facing issues with gun violence? The town of Hungerford showed remarkable resilience in the aftermath of the massacre. What can other communities learn from Hungerford about healing and rebuilding after such a devastating event? How important is it for law enforcement agencies to be prepared for such extreme incidences? What changes in police training and resources might be necessary to effectively respond to mass shooting events? In retrospect, could there have been indicators of Michael Ryan's intentions? What role do mental health and social factors play in preventing such tragedies? How should communities commemorate such tragic events? What is the balance between honouring the memory of the victims and moving forward? Indeed, the Hungerford Massacre was not just a chapter in history, but a lesson in community resilience and policy. The impact of this event extends beyond the immediate horror and loss of life. It serves as a catalyst for introspection and change in how society addresses and manages the complex issues of gun ownership and public safety. In adding to our earlier reflection, consider these additional aspects. The trauma experienced by survivors and families of victims is profound and long-lasting. How can society better support those who have lived through such tragedies? What role can mental health services and community support networks play in aiding recovery and providing ongoing support? The way the media covers such tragic events can shape public perception. What responsibility does the media have in reporting on mass shootings? How can the media coverage be balanced to inform the public without sensationalizing violence or infringing on the dignity of the victims and their families? And in what ways can education and awareness programs in schools and communities help in understanding and preventing violence? How important is it to educate young people about the dangers of gun violence and the importance of responsible behaviour? How do different countries respond to the challenge of gun violence? What can be learned from the approaches taken from various nations in balancing individual rights with public safety? Years after the Hungerford Massacre, have the policies implemented in the wake continued to be effective? Are there lessons to be learned from long-term impacts of these policies? As we ponder these questions, we not only honour the memory of those lost in the Hungerford Massacre, but we also contribute to a broader dialogue of how to create a safer, more understanding and resilient society. Your insights and discussions on these matters are crucial in shaping a future where such tragedies are increasingly rare and communities are better equipped to prevent and respond to such crises.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more content.
Today we look at one of the most notorious UK crime legends to ever exist in the UK criminal underworld. Viv Graham was born in 1959 to Hazel and Eric Graham, and he grew up in Highfield, Rowlands Gill, a village on the outskirts of Gateshead. After quitting his career as a successful amateur boxer, Mr. Graham became a doorman, eventually working with the well-known Gateshead hardman Billy Robinson and Paddy Leonard. With his irrefutable abilities, a talented 17-stone boxer who could bench press 520 pounds, he was soon operating a small army of doormen himself, and he protected various licensed premises in central Newcastle, Byker and Wallsend. Mr. Graham became a reputed organised crime figure in the city and was involved in high-level extortions and racketeering. In 1988, he was shot at during an incident that is believed to have been a revenge attack for an earlier unprovoked assault by Mr. Graham and a fellow bouncer, which left the victim with permanent injuries. Mr. Graham's activities brought him a very large income, occasionally in excess of £30,000 per week. Away from the worlds of bars and nightclubs or enforcement activities, Viv Graham would often frequent bookmakers and was well known for placing bets of over £1,000. However, if he wasn't at the bookmakers, it was also well known you could find Mr. Graham at Andy Webb's gym. He lived with girlfriend Anna Connolly in Walkerville, Newcastle upon Tyne with her children that she had from a previous relationship. Although they were unmarried, they were engaged and he acted as stepfather to the children and they viewed him as their father. Miss Connolly's brother Peter was a pub owner in the biker area of the city, and he would often be approached by fellow pub owners requiring the services of Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham became one of the most well-known and feared men of the northeast of England and earned a huge reputation amongst fellow criminals for extreme violence and showing no mercy on his enemies. This reputation over time was only increased further when Mr. Graham had annihilated several ever well-known Tyneside hardmen. This resulted in many more people staying clear of Mr. Graham without wanting any confrontation. Following an incident in which he was severely assaulted, rival doorman Stuart Watson, who himself had also a substantial reputation in the criminal underworld. During 1989, Mr. Graham was working with a dangerous criminal gang who had been refused access to a nightclub by the then head doorman Stuart Watson. Mr. Watson believed that the ruthless gang would show no respect to other revelers and would treat the place as if they owned it. Furthermore, he obviously wanted to preserve his own position and dominance over the club. Years later, Mr. Watson said of the incident, "I was just doing what I had to do to keep trouble out of the club. As a doorman, your job is to prevent any bad characters from getting in." Unable to intimidate the formidable Mr. Watson, the members of the gang subsequently left, but later returned to the club, accompanied by this time by Viv Graham and some of his associates. It is said that Mr. Graham had been deliberately misinformed about Mr. Watson's activities, and that he was wrongly told that Mr. Watson had made threats against him. The ruckus that ensued took place at the now demolished Hobo's nightclub in Newcastle, and was later revealed to have been recorded on CCTV. Mr. Graham can be seen delivering multiple debilitating punches to Mr. Watson and throwing the 17-stone doorman around the reception area of the nightclub. This incident resulted in Mr. Graham's conviction and inevitable prison sentence in spite of his victim refusing to give any evidence against him. While serving his prison term, Mr. Graham took a keen interest in the case of Stephen Craven, who by then was serving a sentence for murdering Penny Lane in Newcastle Studio nightclub on the 24th of December 1989. Mr. Graham attempted to assist Mr. Craven, who protested his innocence to this day. We will go into the story of Mr. Craven very soon, so stick around for that, guys, it's a really interesting one. The BBC programme Rough Justice covered the murder conviction in Murder at the Studio, which was first broadcast on the 1st of April 1997. Although he protests his innocence even to today, Mr. Craven's conviction still remains in place to this day. Upon Mr. Graham's release from prison, he broke all ties with his former gangland associates, and by doing so, a prolonged bitter gangland dispute ensued. It was also reported that he attempted to mend fences with the previously mentioned Mr. Watson. However, Mr. Graham was soon back in court for an assault in which he is said to have punched a man completely senseless. Around this time, various adversaries with their own agendas began working against Mr. Graham. He had confronted a gang member in a popular Newcastle nightclub about him supplying drugs in one of his establishments, and following a scuffle, the man escaped via the fire exit with Mr. Graham in hot pursuit. Many unsolicited confrontations were set up to try and catch Mr. Graham, one with a notorious, well-known, now deceased fighter that he avoided. He had also at this point survived several attempts on his life. Mr. Graham's apparent dislike of drugs and how he had seen them ruin lives and antagonize the gangs that had a vested interest in selling them. They wanted to expand their drugs enterprises across the city and make more money, but Mr. Graham's anti-drug stance was the only thing that stood in the way. Mr. Graham was aware of their plans to remove many of his men from the doors and pubs of the clubs of Newcastle. He was starting to receive death threats almost daily, and shortly before his death, a car drove past Mr. Graham's home, and one of the passengers leant out of the car and shot out the windows of his house. On Christmas Eve 1993, Mr. Graham was involved in another confrontation with another notorious gang in Newcastle. An attempt was made to remove Mr. Graham's firm from an establishment, but the attempt failed, as Mr. Graham, being there in person, repeatedly punched one of the gang members, breaking his jaw, whilst the other members made a hasty retreat. On New Year's Eve 1993, Viv Graham was ambushed whilst returning to his car, which he had parked in a side street at Wallsend High Street. The offside front window of his Ford Sierra Sapphire Cosworth had been broken, possibly to make him hesitate before entering the vehicle, or to activate the alarm so as Mr. Graham would return to the parked car. However, there is speculation as to whether this was done well before the shooting in a separate incident. He was shot 3 times by an unidentified gunman, one shot leaving a large hole in his back, but even after being left in such a bad shape, he still managed to drag himself back to Wallsend High Street, where he was found by a fellow bouncer, Terry Scott. In spite of him receiving 30 pints of blood, Viv Graham unfortunately died at North Tyneside General Hospital 4 hours later, just aged 34. He was later buried at Hookergate Cemetery. It was reported that he had received a telephone death threat just hours before he was shot, that Viv Graham had often told others that were close to him that he most probably wouldn't even get to C40, something that would later turn out to be true. He had curtailed the activities of several drug-based gangs by refusing them access to pubs and clubs that employed him, but maybe to his own downfall, he was known to never carry a firearm. The Northumbria police interviewed an informant who named the killer and confessed to his role as the getaway driver. In 2014, a police transcript was obtained by a local newspaper that outlined a police visit to a so-called supergrass whilst he was serving a prison sentence. During the visit, the informant watched a video and showed detectives a safe house, a bungalow in Heaton, which had been used by the hitman in the immediate aftermath of Mr. Graham's death. He then detailed his own involvement in the notorious murder and named the gunman who allegedly murdered Mr. Graham. It is documented that he claimed to be in possession of a tape recording of the gunman admitting to the shooting, but he did not hand it over to the officers. He claimed to have stolen a Ford Escort from Berkeley to use for the shooting before travelling to Heaton. On the 31st of December in 1993, he picked up the gunman who said he was going to shoot Mr. Graham in the legs for retaliation for an ongoing dispute they had had. They went to Mr. Graham's house, but his car wasn't there, so they drove around Wallsend and soon discovered Mr. Graham's car parked just off Wallsend High Street. The stolen car was then parked with a view of the back of Mr. Graham's car. The gunman got out, walked over to Mr. Graham's car and smashed the driver's door window. When Mr. Graham returned to his vehicle, 3 shots were fired at him. The gunman ran back to the stolen Escort, got in, and the informant drove off. Once back in Heaton, the Escort was set alight and the pair were picked up by other criminal associates. The informant stated that the gunman had used a .357 Magnum. He stated that he believed the gunman was high on cocaine at the time of the shooting, and they both believed that Mr. Graham was only wounded, as he was last seen alive on all 4s beside his car. In 1998, Northumbria police questioned 5 men about an alleged conspiracy to murder the bouncer. In 2002, Tyneside career criminal Lee Sean Watson turned supergrass after he admitted the murder of Freddie Knights in Long Benton, Newcastle upon Tyne. During the Knights murder trial, the jury at Leeds Crown Court heard how Mr. Watson had told police who was responsible for the shooting of Mr. Graham. The court was also told after he was arrested for a separate offence in 1994 that Mr. Watson had boasted to police, "You couldn't catch us for shooting Viv Graham," but Mr. Watson's account is widely disputed. Mr. Graham's family offered a £100,000 reward for any information leading to the arrest and conviction of the killers. Over 500 homes were visited and some hundreds of statements were taken. In spite of these developments, no one has ever been brought to justice and the murder remains unsolved to this day. Viv Graham and the crimes he committed will never be forgotten in the UK criminal underworld. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay safe.
The murder of Lynn Siddens in 1978 and the subsequent quest for justice is a gripping tale and tragic story that spans nearly 2 decades. Lynn Siddens, a 16-year-old girl from Derby, was brutally attacked and murdered during a walk along a canal side near her home. The heinous nature of the crime: she was stabbed 43 times, strangled, and then her face was submerged in water, shocked the local community and set off a complex and lengthy investigation. Initially, Lynn's childhood friend, Fitzroy Brooks, then 15, was implicated in the murder. He had been walking with Lynn along the canal on the day that she was killed. Fitzroy was tried for the murder but later cleared after retracting his guilty plea and accusing his stepfather, Michael Brooks, of being the true perpetrator. Despite these accusations, the case remains unsolved for years, with justice for Lynn seeming elusive. The turning point in the case came through the extraordinary efforts of Lynn's grandmother, Flo Siddens. Convinced of Michael Brooks' guilt, Flo embarked on an 18-year campaign to bring him to justice. Despite facing numerous obstacles, including the initial reluctance of the police to charge Mr. Brooks and the challenges of navigating the legal system, Flo's determination never wavered. She gathered her own evidence, organised petitions and marches, and spent over £14,000 on legal battles to have the case reopened. Flo's relentless pursuit of justice finally paid off when Michael Brooks was brought to trial and convicted of Lynn's murder in 1996, 18 years after the crime. During the trial, it emerged that Mr. Brooks had a history of disturbing behaviour, including fantasies of mutilating women and a desire to outdo infamous serial killers like Jack the Ripper. Mr. Brooks was found guilty based on a combination of forensic evidence and testimonies, including that of Fitzroy Brooks, who admitted to stabbing Lynn under his stepfather's orders, but identified Michael Brooks as the one who delivered the fatal blows. The case also highlighted significant flaws in the initial police investigation, from a failure to properly search for the murder weapon to mishandling and the loss of crucial evidence. It was only through the Siddens family's dogged persistence that these mistakes were eventually acknowledged, leading to a re-examination of the evidence and Mr. Brooks's eventual conviction. In the end, the justice achieved for Lynn Siddens is a testament to the power of familiar love and the unwavering commitment in the face of adversity. Flo Siddens' extraordinary efforts not only brought her granddaughter's killer to justice, but also highlighted the importance of perseverance and the impact that individuals can have on the legal system. The case of Lynn Siddens remains a poignant reminder of the devastating impact of crime on families and communities, as well as the lengths to which they will go to seek justice for their loved ones.
Once a fortnight at Melbourne in Derbyshire, an elderly woman visits the graveyard where her granddaughter was buried. And from the back room of a terraced house, she spent 13 years lobbying people in authority.
Dear Mr. Newing, I do not know how much you know of the murder of my granddaughter Lynn Siddens, who was murdered April the 3rd, 1978, and my family and myself have been fighting to get the killer to justice.
Flo Siddens believes if she doesn't fight for justice, her granddaughter's death will be forgotten. Flo and Lynn Siddens had a special relationship. Flo raised her from a baby. Mrs. Siddens had already brought up 4 children at Sinfin in Derby. In 1961, one of her daughters was 16 and in trouble.
I was 6 months pregnant before my mum asked me if I was. And then, of course, I had to tell her and I had to go to the doctor and that, but I never told my dad. My mum told my dad and he was really upset about it. He didn't speak to me again till after I had Lynn. When we was going to have her adopted, we thought it was a shame, like I said, I'd bring her up and that. And that's when we took her when she was 6 weeks old. We decided not to let her go. I was still living at home anyway, and it just became a natural thing that when Lynn started talking, she just called my mum, Mum. And it just went on from there, really. And she, with me still living there, she called me Gail.
She used to get off the school bus and come to my parents' house, and we had a family pet dog called Flash, and he used to take her from our house over the bridge to Sinfin to her house every evening. It got to be a ritual every evening, and that was because he was a friendly dog anyway, and she had a pet, so she got on with dogs as well. And she used to call for me in the mornings as well, going to school, and we'd get the bus from around the corner from where I lived. And she'd bring 3 biscuits, one for me, one for Flash and one for herself.
She had a wonderful record collection, actually, of 50s and 60s. And we used to go around and we used to pretend that we were sort of like the pop stars and stand there and sing, which was wonderful, really.
In April 1978, when Lynn was 16, she went shopping and didn't come back. Her family began to worry and started knocking on neighbours' doors. A few houses up the street lived a family called Brooks. Lynn was friendly with 15-year-old Roy Brooks. He said they'd gone looking for a job, then separated.
Anyway, 10 o'clock come, one policeman come down and he said, well, we can't look for her tonight because it's too dark. And 2 of Prosty and that. Well, he went away and then we phoned my sons then to come. And I was getting worried because I knew something had happened. I just felt it in my bones, it had. And that night when she was missing, the wind was blowing and 2 o'clock in the morning, Keith and Barry went looking round the woods. That's because if she's in them woods, she'd never survive the morning because it was that cold.
The police treated it as a missing person case. Most missing persons turn up unharmed. Lynn's family weren't impressed.
We knew something had happened. We didn't know what. I don't think you like to admit it to yourself. But they wouldn't listen to us. They kept saying that she'd run away.
I would say that from the time that I first met Mrs. Siddens, she quickly convinced me that everything wasn't well, and I certainly treated the matter seriously, along with the other police officers.
Every day when we went to the police station, they just didn't seem to be interested and we weren't getting no publicity, so in the end we went to see if we could get something further done.
So what did you do?
I went to see Philip Whitehead, who was my MP. My mum went with me, and as soon as he heard of it, he was, you know, outraged that there'd been no publicity or anything, being as she'd been missing nearly a week. And the next day we got full publicity. Well, Evening Telegraph, and put out on the news at the Derby County football ground.
I'm afraid the police response when the girl was still missing, although as we now know, dead by that time, was that she was probably sleeping rough, and girls often did that, and we weren't to be worried. Well, everyone was worried. The whole neighbourhood was out looking for her. There were appeals made at the football ground, at the baseball ground for her to the crowds. There was general agitation, and she was found horribly murdered soon afterwards. I never forgot, though, that initial indifference and the sort of shrug, oh, she's just off sleeping rough.
6 days after Lynn disappeared, the awful truth emerged. 2 boys out walking by the Trent and Mersey Canal, a mile or so from her home, found her body. There were 40 knife wounds, and so it appeared that Lynn had been stabbed to death. Now a missing person case became a murder case with an obvious suspect. Roy Brooks was arrested and taken in for questioning. By the early hours of the following morning, he'd confessed. He said Lynn made sexual advances towards him, so he stabbed her. But his stepfather, Michael Brooks, later named as the probable killer, was allowed to see him before the statement was made. There's been doubt about it ever since.
He was allowed to speak to his stepfather, but there would certainly be a policeman present.
Do you remember who that was?
I can't remember now, no.
Looking back, do you think it was the right thing for him to have been allowed to see his stepfather, given what's happened since?
I don't think it would have made any difference to the outcome at all.
Why not?
I was quite satisfied that that Roy made his initial admission without any sort of pressure, and at that stage I accepted Roy's version.
But the pathologist Alan Usher gave a different cause of death to that contained in Roy Brooks' confession. Professor Usher said Lynn had been strangled. Roy Brooks was held in Leicester Prison, and because he'd been charged, detectives couldn't routinely question him. Dr. Tom Dorman, a psychiatrist, saw the boy a number of times. His patient gave a new version of what had happened. The police were called.
The story that he gave later on at the Crown Court at Nottingham was the one that he gave that morning, that his stepfather had been involved in the murder. and the statement was made through his solicitor.
When you heard him make that admission, what were your immediate feelings? Can you remember?
I was quite surprised.
Why?
Because it had been entirely unexpected.
As well as being surprised, did you believe him at that point, or not? I'm not prepared to say whether I believed him or not. I wasn't given the opportunity to question him on that second statement, and at that stage neither was any other police officer.
When Roy Brooks made the second statement, I think they should have held the trial up then and gone into it more then, investigations. But they didn't do that. They just took the two statements into court, which I thought was wrong.
On the 6th of November 1978, at the Old Crown Court in Nottingham, Roy Brooks went on trial accused of murder. He repeated what he'd said in prison. He said his stepfather, Michael Brooks, had given him a knife and ordered him to stab Lynn. He claimed he'd only scratched her body, and it was his stepfather who'd carried out the killing. His lawyers made much of the fact that though Lynn was 4 inches taller and a stone heavier than Roy, she didn't appear to have put up a struggle. The judge, Mr. Justice Mays, reminded the jury repeatedly that they weren't there to try the stepfather, they were there to try the boy, and they should concern themselves only with whether the boy had murdered Lynn Siddens. They took just an hour to return their verdict: not guilty. Roy's acquittal was reported only in the local press. He was taken into care at the Pastures Psychiatric Hospital. While in care, he was interviewed by a senior detective, Superintendent Jim Reddington. The police had to find out which of Roy's two statements was the truth. His social worker, Keith Sherwood, sat in on the questioning. He said it was his impression the police wanted Roy to revert to the first statement. He did. Superintendent Reddington, it was suggested that you wanted Roy Brooks to implicate himself alone so that the case could be closed and you could get the Siddens family off your back. What do you say to that?
That's entirely wrong. My only objective, as it is in all the case I investigate, is to find the truth of the matter. That's all I want to do, find the truth of the matter. And if one was involved alone or both, all I want to do is get the truth.
The victim's family demonstrated outside Derby police station and marched through the streets, claiming the case had been quietly closed.
We did the demonstration in 1979, got 6,000 signatures, and then we started putting posters up in cars going round who murdered Lynn Siddens. The other one, we put posters up all around town who murdered Lynn Siddens, because I was threatened with going to court for that.
The case was beginning to attract attention. The BBC broadcast a documentary within months of the end of the trial, with Auntie Cynthia on the offensive.
We are dissatisfied with the handling of the case by Derbyshire Constabulary and disturbed that at this late day the murderer is still at large. We are therefore seeking assurance that the police are still pursuing inquiries and that the case will be speedily concluded.
The Brooks family was rehoused because with all the publicity, life in Sinfin had become unbearable. The council moved them to an address several miles away. But even there, Michael Brooks and his wife Dot were made to feel unwelcome. It had been that way since Lynn was murdered.
Roughly a week after Roy was, my stepson was arrested and charged with the crime. The little girl who was age 7, Tracy, she was beaten up. We had bricks thrown at the door, ominous letters. On one occasion, there was 3 lads aged about 11 to 12 that tried to strangle her. And through the good nature of the next door neighbour at that time, actually seen this being taking place, and she chased the lads. Otherwise, I think my daughter had been dead.
Were you involved in the attack on Lynn Siddens?
No, I was not.
In any way?
No.
Do you think that people still believe, despite the verdict of the trial, that you were involved?
Quite a few people, yes. I would definitely say so. I've not really moved since we've left Sinfin. I've not really moved out of my home. I've always stayed in the Derby area. But friends of the family, and even my mother, has come down here to visit me at my address and told me she's heard people still trying to make an accusation against me.
The next year, Michael Brooks left his wife for another woman, and Dot Brooks got in touch with the Siddens family. She said he'd confessed to killing Lynn.
She kept phoning me up every night and telling me what was done to Lynn and what was said while it was being done, and all different things and what Lynn had on. And she kept going through the gory details all the while. And I kept saying to her, well, if he comes back, would you retract the statement? She says, no. She says, you know, I don't want him back and what have you.
Dot Brooks made two statements about Michael, that he'd used a knife on her while having sex, and that he'd boasted of murdering Lynn.
But when Mick Brooks came back, she retracted the statement, and no charges were made for wasting police's time, and the statement was just dropped.
Cynthia Smith then took the law into her own hands. Seeing Michael and Dot Brooks together in the street, she drove her car at them. She was fined £100 for reckless driving. At one point, she says, there was talk of an attempted murder charge. The Brooks family, now including Roy, decided to start a new life in Peterborough. They found a house on the Westwood estate. The existing tenant wanted to move back to Derby. Over a drink, he agreed a swap. While in the pub, he says he became curious about the Lynn Siddens case.
After 3 or 4 pints, he went to the toilet, and I asked his young lad about the case with the Lynn Siddens, affair, and he told me that it was his stepfather, because I asked him straight out, about it, and he said it was his stepfather. He said, but don't tell him, don't mention that I've told you. This is what the words he said. And a couple of pints later, when he came back, I asked his dad out as well, straight up out there.
Michael Brooks?
Yeah, Michael Brooks, yeah. And he said yes. He said, but they'll never get me.
The police couldn't follow up Shane Morley's allegation because he didn't tell them till 5 years later. By then, Lynn's family had long since put their faith in the media rather than the police. In 1981, they found a new and influential ally, Britain's best-known campaigning journalist, Paul Foote.
Mrs. Siddens came and we had a long chat, and I was very impressed with her. And of course, when I read the papers, I was absolutely amazed by the story and was determined that something should be written about it. I did write an article that was actually chucked out by the lawyers because they said that it's absolutely impossible. You can't write an article which suggests, however far off a way, but nevertheless suggests that a chap is a murderer who hasn't been charged for the murder. You can't say that kind of thing. You'll have to produce more proof.
In 1981, after lengthy legal debate, Paul Foote's arguments won the day.
Of course, when it was published, there was no complaint from anyone at all. In fact, the problem about it was that there was no complaint and no interest, as far as I could see. And that's why, in one way or another, for 10 years, I've kept going back to it, repeating it and going back to it.
While Paul Foote kept writing, Lynn's family kept up the pressure on the police. In 1985, they filed a complaint. Merseyside detectives investigated and produced a report. Derbyshire's police committee was given that report. It wasn't made public.
The senior police officers that were conducting this inquiry for Liverpool were absolutely shocked about what they discovered in Derbyshire. They were absolutely outraged that their recommendation that there should be another inquiry by outside police force into what had happened here was turned down effectively by the Derbyshire police and therefore couldn't be pursued by the DPP.
A new solicitor began acting for the Siddens family. She told them they were wasting their time trying to get a prosecution for murder. They didn't have the money to bring a private prosecution. The police and the DPP didn't have the evidence to bring their own.
A murder, one would expect quite rightly to be a criminal case, but Mrs. Siddens has tried to persuade the police to prosecute. She's tried to persuade the Department of Public Prosecutions to prosecute, and they simply won't do it. Now, of course, theoretically, she could bring a private prosecution, but the state of the system really just prevents her from doing that. A private prosecution would be fantastically expensive, and anyone wanting to bring a private prosecution has to be very, very wealthy, and Mrs. Siddens isn't wealthy. Secondly, of course, if she did bring a private prosecution, it would be open to the DPP to take it over and to do with that prosecution what they wanted. And it's quite clear that what they would do is to take it over and stop it.
The Director of Public Prosecutions was stuck with the notion that you had to have at least a 51% chance of securing a conviction before you went into court. And with all these conflicting stories and the time that had elapsed and the problems that many in the local police didn't believe that they got it wrong the first time, there wasn't a sufficient collection of evidence to do that. Not at that point.
Well into her 70s, Flo Siddens continued to work to fund her campaign. She'd run up thousands of pounds in legal bills. 9 years after Lynn's death, she finally got a break. The Law Society looked into her case and agreed to help pay for court action. Not for murder, but for damages.
Well, I'm feeling relieved, really. Taking a load off of mine because I wouldn't know how to win it other way without winning legal aid.
The next battle the family faced was to persuade the authorities to allow the action to go ahead, outside the normal time limit. That meant travelling to hearings all over the country. It took a further 4 years.
You're living with it every day. I know it's all come to a head now, but, I mean, over the years, you just can't get on with your lives. We've got to see this through to the end now, no matter what happens.
I'm determined, I am. I mean, if I set out to do anything, I want to do it. And I won't stop till I've got to the end of it. As long as I'm around when it happens, that's what bothers me.
What came next was an improving of relations with Derbyshire Police. It coincided with the arrival of a new Chief Constable and a firm date for the damages action.
Hello, Mr. Noon. I'm pleased to meet you anyway.
Nice to see you again.
Yeah, come on in.
Are you all right?
John Newing had come from the Metropolitan Police. After studying the file, he assured Mrs. Siddens the case was not closed, and after years of official silence, said so to the BBC.
Okay, well then, we know that, in essence, we can't really take any further action until the case is decided one way or the other. I want to make sure that we finally get the matter properly resolved. And that is, that's an objective not just that I've got, but that a lot of my officers have got. They would like to see this case closed. And there's only one way to close a murder case.
Before that, there was history to be made. The damages action in London was the first for a murder of which no one had been convicted. News organisations lined up for pictures of Flo, Gail and Cynthia. And when Roy Brooks arrived to give evidence, he found himself surrounded. 13 years after he stood trial in a case that attracted little attention outside Derby. His legal advisers shielded him from publicity, but couldn't prevent him from being made to appear on the orders of appeal court judges. He repeated in chilling detail what he'd said at his trial, that Michael Brooks had forced him to lure Lynn to her death because of the older man's desire to kill like Jack the Ripper. Mr. Justice Rougier asked why he'd not warned Lynn. Roy Brooks said he'd not taken the threat seriously, then was frightened. Michael Brooks, the target of the court action, never came to court. He stayed in the quiet of East Anglia. But even in his absence, his personality and his alleged sexual habits dominated proceedings. It was said he got pleasure from using knives, that he'd stabbed pictures of nude women, that he'd talked of getting girls, and had threatened to harm his wife if the attack on Lynn Siddens hadn't succeeded. His barrister chose not to call him to defend himself against the allegations, arguing there was no direct physical evidence to link Mr. Brooks with the murder. The judge, sitting without a jury, said he would draw his own conclusions from the defendant's failure to appear. He concluded that Michael Brooks had been 100% responsible for the crime, and at the time of the murder, he emotionally dominated his stepson. That domination was so complete that Roy would obey his commands without question. Lynn's family had been saying that since the spring of 1978. Suddenly, in 1991, it seemed everyone wanted to listen.
tell us how you feel, please?
Very happy. Well, we just want to say that we're hoping for a criminal trial now. And we wouldn't have had to do all this in the first place if the police had done the job properly.
It has been worthwhile anyway. We've got to it eventually with a lot of hard work, but I'm pleased.
What do you think of the way the judge summed the whole case up?
I think it was very good, I do. Yeah.
He seemed really to understand.
I think he did, yes. I'm glad somebody understood, though. But we've got a lot of people to thank for all this lot.
And so what happens now, then?
Well, I'm hoping he'll have a conviction.
Do you want to see Michael Brooks put away in prison for a long time?
That's a very long while. Yes.
What are your thoughts towards him?
Oh, what do you... Well, I hate him, don't get me wrong. I'd never like anybody who did anything like that to a girl. Or anybody.
It must be asked why it was for 13 years the police abandoned this murder investigation, and why it was for 13 years the police failed to dig up evidence that these two women, with no resources, dug up. It must be asked why these two women managed to piece together the evidence that they dug up to build a case against Michael Brooks, and why it was that the police took no notice of that evidence. Why was it that the Department of Public Prosecutions refused to prosecute even when these two women had dug the evidence up, pieced it together and built a case? Questions must be answered.
Why wasn't Michael Brooks prosecuted at the time? I'm afraid that's not something you can ask me. With the benefit of hindsight, I can say that probably he should have been, but he wasn't. It's really not going to achieve any sensible purpose in going over, if you like, old history. But the fact of the matter is that when you look at it 13 years on, yes, he should have been on the charge sheet along with his stepson.
Are you saying basically that Derbyshire Police made a mess of the case?
You use emotive language, don't you? And I suppose that's inevitable. It's simpler to put it, but bluntly, yes, I suppose that is, when you look back, that is the end result. Certainly that's how Flo Siddens sees it.
And you agree with that?
Yes.
It was a very difficult investigation. All sorts of problems sprung up from time to time, and we dealt them the best way we knew how at the time, and I think if it all happened again, we'd probably do exactly the same thing. It's been very difficult. I feel very sorry for the victims' relatives, and I can understand their feelings, but we did our best.
What we have to recognise is when mistakes are made, they have to be admitted. But that does not mean that the people responsible for those mistakes are bad people, nor that they are unprofessional. It means they have made mistakes. When you look at their record through a career, a lifetime of policing, their record has been extremely good indeed. On this occasion, it wasn't up to the normal professional standards that you would associate with a murder investigation or any other criminal investigation for that matter.
In Peterborough, Michael Brooks remained indoors. Visiting reporters became the target of his wife's frustration. Upstairs, Michael Brooks denounced the Siddenses and his stepson.
It's not only the Siddens and Roy that bleeding liar.
Will you say to us, in your own words, that you did not kill Lynn Siddens, which is what you're saying, isn't it?
I already told you that.
Then he accused the Siddenses of threatening him.
You'll ask them about the plan to murder me and my daughter. Go and ask them.
Lynn's Aunt Cynthia called that a load of rubbish. Michael Brooks' lawyer said he'd be appealing against the judgment.
The past years and the events of yesterday and today have placed the most enormous strain on my client and his family. He is not going to be interviewed at this juncture. If he were, he would repeat his denials of his responsibility for this dreadful murder, although I appreciate that such denials would be like spitting in the wind in view of the long-standing campaign of public vilification against him.
The High Court has ordered Michael Brooks to pay damages, the most the law will allow, £10,641.
I think it's sickening when you see the amount, what they offer.
Compared with what?
Libel cases and things like that. I that says they got hundreds of thousands for calling somebody boring or frivolous, and somebody being murdered to get nearly 11,000. I think it's disgusting. It's about time the law was changed.
I want to see him caught for what he did at Lynn. I'll feel happy then when we've got him to court, and I'll never rest till we do get him.
I think that Flo Siddens is one of the most remarkable women I've known. I met her first under the shadow of enormous tragedy. She brought Lynn up, and her murder and the horrific circumstances of it would have shaken any family. And they devastated Mrs. Siddens and her daughters, Gail and Cynthia, and the rest of her family. I think they were all deeply shaken by it. But to see that woman over the next 12 years enter her own old age, fighting for a cause, educating herself in the ways of the law, buttonholing journalists, appealing to MPs, going endlessly down to London, and simply doggedly saying one thing: the murderer of Lynn Siddens is still walking the streets a free man. The law should not allow that. He has to be brought to justice. And eventually people listened.
The saga of Lynn Siddens' murder and the subsequent legal odyssey underscores the profound impact of crime on families and the broader community. It highlights the lengths to which individuals will go to seek justice, even in the face of overwhelming odds and systematic inertia. The determination of Lynn's grandmother, Flo Siddens, serves as a powerful reminder of the strength of familial bonds and the human capacity for resilience and perseverance. Her relentless pursuit of justice for nearly 2 decades against a backdrop of legal and procedural setbacks stands as a testament to the enduring quest for truth and accountability. This story also prompts us to reflect on the effectiveness and responsiveness of the legal system. It raises important questions about the initial investigation of crimes and the preservation and handling of evidence, and the mechanisms for reviewing and reopening cases that may have been mishandled. Moreover, it brings to the forefront the emotional toll on families of victims, who often find themselves fighting not just for their loved ones, but against a system that seems indifferent to their loss. In this light, it's essential to consider what changes could be made to ensure that justice is more swiftly and accurately delivered. How can law enforcement agencies improve their investigation processes? What support systems should be in place for families of victims navigating the legal system? And importantly, how can communities come together to support those whose lives have been shattered by crime? We invite you to share your thoughts and reflections on this case. How do you think the legal and investigative processes could have been improved to prevent similar tragedies from dragging on without resolution for so long? What role can and should the community play in supporting families affected by such profound loss, in ensuring justice is served? Your insights and perspectives are valuable as we collectively ponder on these critical issues.